We all think we know how to listen. But what if I told you there's a way of listening that's not just about, hearing words, but about actually shifting power and sparking real, tangible social change? Well, that's exactly what we're going to explore today.
So let's start with this huge question. I know, it sounds a little lofty, right? Change the world? But what if a very specific, intentional kind of listening could be a genuine tool to dismantle inequality? Let's dig into what the research has to say.
All right, so to really get this solution, we first have to understand the problem. And the problem starts with a pretty simple fact. In most conversations, especially the big ones that shape our world, not everybody actually gets a voice. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The source material argues that marginalization isn't just some accident. It's an active, communicative process. Think about that. The very thing that's supposed to connect us, communication, can be weaponized to silence and completely erase entire communities from the conversation.
And it goes even deeper than that. It's not just that people are ignored, it's that they're often treated as passive subjects, like something to be studied and fixed by outside experts, instead of being seen as the experts of their own lives with their own valid solutions. So, why does this happen? What's really driving this silencing effect? Well, according to this research, it all boils down to one thing: power. And you can really see how it works right here. Simply put, your access to a microphone often depends on how much money you have. This means the perspectives of the wealthy and powerful get amplified over and over again, until their views just seem like common sense, while a whole range of other valid ideas get pushed to the margins. The source points to a major global force behind this dynamic: neoliberalism. Now, this isn't just some dusty economic theory. It's described as a system that actively concentrates wealth and power, which in turn fundamentally shapes who gets to speak and whose knowledge is seen as legitimate on a global scale. Okay, so that's the problem. A system built on a kind of communicative inequality. But here's the good news. Our source proposes a really powerful solution, a totally different way of thinking about all this, called the culture-centered approach.
First up, the first pillar is culture. And we're not talking about something that's static or stuck in a museum. Think of culture as the living, breathing lens through which a community understands its world, its problems, its strengths, and its own unique pathways to solutions.
The second pillar is structure. These are the concrete, real-world systems we all have to navigate. Things like economic policies, laws, and major institutions. They're the literal rules of the game that can either open doors for people or slam them shut.
And finally, we have agency. And this one is absolutely crucial. It's the inherent power of people, no matter what their situation is, to make choices, to push back, to negotiate the structures they're in, and to create change from the ground up.
And here's the real key to the whole thing. These three pillars aren't in separate boxes. They're in a constant, dynamic dance with each other. Real, transformative communication happens right at that intersection, where a community's culture and its own agency start pushing against those existing structures.
So that brings us to the how. How does this framework actually work in the real world? Well, it completely reframes listening, turning it from something passive into a radical, world-changing act. Just look at the difference here. On one side, you've got the typical top-down approach that keeps power exactly where it is. But on the other, culture-centered listening flips that whole pyramid upside down. It's all about collaboration and empowering communities to actually rewrite the rules.
But, and this is a really big but, there's a trap. Powerful institutions are smart. They can learn the language of listening without having any real intention to change. It can become a PR stunt, what the author calls a whitewashing strategy, that gives the illusion of being open while changing absolutely nothing.
So to avoid that trap, this approach has three core tenets. First, inversion. Instead of just studying marginalized communities, we turn the camera around and we question the assumptions of the powerful. Second, incompleteness. We have to humbly admit we don't have all the answers. And third, imagination. We have to work with communities to dream up and build entirely new solutions together.
And that really brings us to the whole point of this entire approach. You see, this isn't just some interesting academic theory. It's a practical blueprint for imagining and then actually building a fundamentally different and more just world. I just love this concept of returning the gaze. For so long, marginalized communities have been the ones being studied. This framework gives them the tools to become the analysts, to look back at the centers of power, to critique them, and to challenge the so-called official story that often keeps them down.
And really, that's the question we're left with. And it's not just a question for policymakers or big organizations. It's for all of us, in our own lives, our workplaces, our neighborhoods. Who are the people being silenced all around us? And what incredible new worlds and new possibilities are we missing out on simply because we're not truly listening? This explainer was based on the fascinating work of Mohan Jyoti Dutta. Thanks so much for joining me today.